Welcome into a Monday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Pod. Nick Whalen, Alex Barutha here with you as we are every Monday afternoon throughout the season. Even the final 2 weeks of the regular season, Alex, well, the fantasy season has mostly come to a close. I know the RotoWire Stake League wrapped up last night. Most of my leagues don't really go through Game 82. You got a couple that do extend until the end, the NFBC, but most head-to-head leagues you're either doing like a 2-week final, so maybe you got one more week ahead. But we're getting down to the nitty-gritty, is what we're trying to say. So we will, as always, we'll take live questions. If you're still in the fantasy playoffs, if you have anything you want to ask us, whether it's for this season, next season, dynasty leagues, NBA draft, anything, feel free to throw those in the comments. We'll hit those throughout the pod, as always. Otherwise, we'll kind of wrap up the weekend, look ahead to what we have going in terms of playoff races, some items for next season. Alex, I'm very concerned about Malik Monk, not because I am worried about what this is going to do to the Sacramento Kings, who I already view as a little bit shaky as a playoff team, but what this is going to do to our 6th man of the year bet. He's still the favorite, but he's not going to play again at least the rest of the regular season.
I think he's probably still clear to win the award because he has 72 games logged. He's only missed up to this point 2 games all season. And the only other person really in contention at this point is Naz Reid. Who, yes, Naz Reid has also, I think, only missed 1 game this season. But I don't think he's stepping in very well for Karl Anthony Towns, has played well, but I don't think it's like as important as what Malik Monk has done all season for Sacramento.
I mean, it's really unfortunate timing because I think almost all awards have some recency bias inherently built in. I think missing like the final 9 games of the regular season, unfortunately, is just more impactful than missing the first 9 games or sprinkling in 9 random absences throughout the year, because that's what's fresh in the mind. And yeah, I think it's now open. I mean, I saw some people on Twitter last night are like, "Oh man, this is a bad beat. We're going to lose this Malik Monk bet." Like, I don't think that. I still think he's the favorite. I still think he has the best chance to win it. The odds would reflect that as well. He's minus 170 right now at DraftKings. He's already met, most importantly, the games minimum, right? He's played 72 games. It's not like he's at 62. So he's going to be eligible for it no matter what. But yeah, it's going to be interesting because, I don't really see Naz Reid slowing down here. Minnesota still pushing right now for seeding. They are currently 3rd behind OKC and Denver, but they're a half game behind Denver. They're 1 game behind Oklahoma City. And we also haven't really received much of an update at all on Karl Anthony Towns, right? Well, we'll talk about Joel Embiid momentarily, who, by the way, will not play tomorrow against OKC. There is some hope still that he could play later in the week. But, is that worrying to you at all? I think when Karl Anthony Towns initially went down, you're thinking, all right, this is going to knock him out for most of the rest of the regular season. I guess in my mind, I was thinking, all right, he'll probably be ramping up around the time the playoffs start. I mean, we're, 2.5 weeks out from round 1, and we haven't really heard much at all about Towns.
Yeah, I mean, the word that we got was that he would be reevaluated in 4 weeks. That was on March 12th. So, I assume they're going to reevaluate him at the very end of the regular season or at the very start of the playoffs, which means, I mean, most of the time guys don't come back right after the reevaluation. So my thought has always been, if Minnesota can get Towns back for the second round of the playoffs, that is probably a win for them.
I'll ask you very bluntly now. 1, how much does it matter who Minnesota plays? 2, how confident are you that they could get through a playoff series without Karl Anthony Towns? The current matchup, if the standings froze today, would be New Orleans, but it could be the Mavs, it could be the Kings, it could be the Suns, it could even conceivably be the Clippers.
I think they probably need Towns to win a first round playoff series. I think, it's just too. When a team is able to game plan for you and you're missing one of your basically 2 best offensive players, I think that's a lot. You feel that a lot more than during the regular season, when at this point half the games you play are against teams who just aren't even trying anymore. So I think if they don't have him, assuming they don't have him for a first round series, I would imagine that they would be underdogs. But I would be curious to see how Vegas would feel about like Minnesota, New Orleans, how they would handicap that.
Yeah, I think, assuming Brandon Ingram is back in the mix for New Orleans, right, that becomes that'd be close to a toss-up series for me. I still think Minnesota would be slightly favored. It's not like this New Orleans team has any track record of playoff success, but in terms of healthy talent, it's kind of Edwards, Gobert. You take Towns out of the equation, all of a sudden you're relying more on guys like Naz Reid, which is great, more on Mike Conley, who's played well, but you're asking a lot of Jaden McDaniels in that playoff series. You're asking a lot of, the Monte Morris, Jordan McLaughlin backup point guard combo, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Kyle Anderson. These guys have all given them good minutes. But when rotations shorten and you're asking that to happen in the postseason, I think that becomes dicey. I mean, New Orleans has some of the same issues, right? We talk about their depth all the time. And obviously Zion's playing, I would say, arguably the best basketball of his career. CJ McCollum has been fantastic since Ingram went down. I actually kind of hope we get that series. I think that would be a really fun one. Although I don't really want either of those teams to go home. I mean, the West in general right now is just so stacked up. Dallas moved in to the 5 spot yesterday. They have the same record as New Orleans, but they have the tiebreaker. Clippers still holding serve in 4th. Like, I feel like the Lakers, every time I watch them, they're playing their best basketball of the season. They're 9 games above 500. LeBron, went crazy, 49 threes yesterday, and their win over that really, really good Brooklyn Nets team. I mean, just looking at the play-in right now, right? I mean, if the season ended today, Kings Suns for that 7 spot, loser would play the winner of Lakers Warriors. Like, is this what the league wants in terms of the teams involved in the play-in? I mean, I don't really know if you could generate any more hype, especially when you compare it to the Eastern Conference, right? It's like the 9-10 in the West, Lakers Warriors, the 9-10 in the East, Bulls Hawks.
Yeah, the West is definitely a more intriguing play-in series than the East. I don't know. I've kind of wondered what the league wanted with the play-in. I think they always felt like it was a win-win.
Yeah.
No matter what they got, but it does allow an opportunity for some of these bigger market teams to potentially make the playoffs where they otherwise might not, and then they have to play in a 1 or a 2 game elimination to get there, which is very high stakes, high leverage. You can put that on TV. It's great.
I mean, there is a very realistic scenario here where only one of the Suns, Lakers, and Warriors make the postseason. Which I don't really care if it's good or bad for the league. I'm going to watch no matter what. I don't really care who's involved in the playoffs and who isn't. But I think there are people out there that are like, all right, you could argue that the 3 most important figures in the league, and this is again very arguable, but the 3 most important figures of the league over the last decade have been Durant, Curry, and LeBron. And you're only guaranteed one of those guys in the postseason. And you're essentially right now guaranteed that at least Curry or LeBron is not going to make the playoffs.
I think this is why, and I haven't heard people talk about this as much anymore. I feel like this was something that people discussed maybe like 5 years ago, maybe before the play-in, was just getting rid of the conferences for the playoffs and just doing top 16 records essentially, so that you could just be like, you know what, Chicago, Atlanta, you're out of here. These other teams are out of here. And you could still do the play-in, but just, sort it by record. There's issues that go along with that, but I don't know if that's something the league will consider, but I remember people used to argue about that way more than I think they do now.
Yeah. I mean, the Lakers would be in 6th right now in the Eastern Conference. The Warriors would be the 8th seed by a half game over Philly. So I know that's come up a lot over the last few years, especially when the East was really down bad. It's like when LeBron was finishing out in Cleveland, and it just felt like there were like 1.5 teams that you cared about in the Eastern Conference. I always thought that was a little short-sighted, because to me, it's all going to come around, right? The Western Conference has been the dominant conference for what feels like 20 years, but that's not always going to be the case, right? I think to me, that would have always been a little bit short-sighted. It's like, all right, the West is so good right now. We need to balance this out. Well, who's to say 3 or 4 years from now, the East won't be the better conference? I guess that's kind of what it's trying to accomplish, but I'm ultimately okay with this. I like the rigidity of the current system.
Yeah, I'm generally fine with the way that it is. But it was something I hadn't thought about in a while. But I don't know. I mean, look, I think it's an interesting point in the league where we can have so many of these great players on these teams, like you're talking about, Phoenix, LA, and Golden State, and maybe only one of the 3 make the playoffs. I mean, that's gonna it's sort of a passing of the torch in a way to some of these younger and up and coming teams.
I think that's the key point here, right? It's like the Warriors, I think you could say, have had a very disappointing season. I don't think they expected to be sitting in 10th. The Lakers, to some degree, have been disappointing, right? I think a lot of people thought this could be a 50-plus win team, especially, as we've said over and over, with LeBron and Anthony Davis. Davis especially, not really missing time, getting a great season out of D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura contract working out, etc. But I also don't feel like the Lakers have woefully underachieved. I think they've just been passed up. These guys who ruled the league 4 or 5 years ago, there's just too much good young talent, right? It's like these guys are not only, you think of someone like SGA, they're not only, budding stars. They're 22, 23 years old. Anthony Edwards, of course, in that conversation. They're also leading teams to, 52, 53 win seasons. So I think that like waiting period of, all right, this guy, he looks like he's going to be a really good player. His team's not that good. Like, we're seeing guys, blossom into great players and also have the talent around them because of how much general talent there is in the league right now. Like, there just aren't that many guys who are great players stuck on a bad team, right? It's like Victor Wembanyama is kind of on an island in that regard.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting point in the NBA because I don't think that really happened. I'm trying to think of another era where that happened, because I guess Jordan, I don't know, because like when Jordan retired, there was definitely a gap there before LeBron came into the NBA, and that era was pretty weak when LeBron jumped in.
That was the lowest the talent pool, I think, has been in our context. Like, I'm not going to sit here and talk about what the talent pool was like in 1981, but that early to mid 2000s, like, just look at who made the All NBA teams. I mean, it's a stark difference.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess there was a little bit of a passing of the torch. Like Kareem was exiting the league, and then Larry Bird, Magic Johnson step in. But yeah, I mean, I think we really are at that transition point where some of these greatest players of all time are on the downslope while everybody else is coming up. I think it's part of why the league is so good right now. And it's such a different style of basketball. Like LeBron, KD, Curry, these guys weren't playing this style of basketball when they entered the NBA. It's a completely new crop of young players who grew up playing the game basically the way that Curry changed the game. Now they've all played the game like that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point. I also think on top of that, you have, LeBron is still, for the most part, looking like LeBron. He's putting up 40 last night. Steph Curry, for the most part, looks like the same Steph Curry. You could argue that they're maybe not quite as effective as they were at their peak, but you catch them on the right night. LeBron looks like he's back in 2013. Curry looks like he's back in 2016. And, I think players tended to phase out earlier in their careers historically, right? It's like, like Curry and LeBron are in their mid to late 30s, Kevin Durant in that category as well. And they still have the expectations of being LeBron James, being Kevin Durant, being Stephen Curry. But, they're just at a different point in their career, but they're playing well enough that you can't say like, oh, it's just like Dirk at the end of his career or Kobe at the end of his career. It's like LeBron's what, 39 years old or whatever. And he's still basically, it's like title or bust. And it kind of feels that way for Curry. It kind of feels that way for Kevin Durant. So yeah, I think that's kind of what your point is, right? Which is not only are we in a golden age of young talent, but the old guard, which typically would have phased out by now, is still going.
Yeah. I mean, not a lot of players were still racking up, I think, all-star appearances when they were over 36 years old. And some of those
LeBron might make second team All-NBA.
He might. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be a little different now with the games played stuff, but yeah, that definitely throws a wrench into things, but you're right.
We'll do All NBA at some point, maybe next week or the week after. I will say, you and I have talked about it on a cursory basis on the RotoWire NBA show, which, hey, by the way, you can listen to tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern on Sirius XM NBA Radio. There really aren't that many guys who I think are going to fall victim to the games played minimums, right? So the way I always, like when I try to talk NBA or All-Star or anything like that, I just go to Basketball Reference, I sort by VORP. That's where I start. And it's kind of a pretty good catch-all. It gives you, a pretty good list of like the top 50 guys in the league in some order. I mean, there's not many who are not going to clear that 65 game threshold. Obviously, Joel Embiid, he's got 34 games played. Şengün's at 63. I don't think he was going to make All NBA anyway, but he's, at least on like the fringes of that conversation. Donovan Mitchell, he's not going to play 65. Other than that, I mean, LaMelo Ball, again, I don't think he was making All NBA anyway. There aren't many guys who aren't going to make the cut. Devin Booker might be close. He's at 60 right now. Lauri Markkanen's at 55. Again, he wasn't going to make it anyway. Murray's at 54. He probably wasn't going to make it. That to me is less of a big deal as I thought it would be, relative to the games missed that we saw over the last few years. Like Embiid would have been a first teamer if he met the games minimum. He's out. Donovan Mitchell probably makes one of these teams. I don't think he would have been first team, but he would have made one of these if he got there. Other than that, everybody else is going to be eligible.
Yeah, and I think I do think we got fairly lucky with some injury stuff this year, but yes. And so maybe like I think there probably will within the next 5 years. It just luck wise the way these things work, there will be a year where a ton of guys get hurt and play probably like 63 games or 59 games.
Yep.
And then we're going to have like an all NBA second and third team filled with guys that we're going to expect, you know?
Yeah. The Al
But
Jeffersons of the world.
Right. As of this year, we're not going to run into that issue.
Yeah. And that's something I want to hit on later in the pod is, some of these guys who ended up being, kind of boons in fantasy this year. It's like, are we buying back in on the Anthony Davises of the world? Does this come back around next season? I want to hit a couple other items from the weekend. I mean, basically when we talk about Victor Wembanyama on this pod, it's just, let's say really nice things about him for a few minutes. I don't really have many points. I mean, the guy's just outrageous, dude. 40, 20, and 7 with 2 steals and a block against the Knicks. They win that game over the weekend. Lost last night to Golden State, but really close game. Kept it within 4, 32, 9, and 5 with 7 combined blocks and steals for Wembanyama. Last 13 games, he's got 24 points, 12 boards, 5 assists, 4 blocks, shooting 35% from 3. Just want to once again remind everybody, Victor Wembanyama, in my opinion, has been a level up from what I expected. And it's pretty rare for that to happen, right? Like he's on that short list of guys who've come in with all-time levels of hype. LeBron's on that list. I think you could maybe argue Zion. I don't even know if I would put Anthony Davis on there because I think he was considered pretty raw. You look at what those guys did their rookie years. Davis was not great as a rookie. Go look at the numbers. They're way lower than you would think. LeBron was obviously very good. We knew coming out of that rookie year, yeah, this guy's going to live up to the hype. I wouldn't say he necessarily blew the hype out of the water in the way that Victor Wembanyama has to me.
No, Wembanyama has been ridiculous, and I think it is getting down. I want to say it is getting downplayed, but it's just like the team around him is so bad. I mean, there's guys who he's playing alongside almost every night who are like not real starters. I think Devin Vassell is probably a starter in the NBA. Sohan, I don't even know if Sohan's a long-term starter in the NBA, to be honest. Trey Jones, no. And then that's before we even get to the bench. And Wembanyama's been insane. As Nick drops away from the podcast, probably accidentally. But I think, look, Nick's popping back in. You're back.
I have no idea what happened there.
Weird.
My page just refreshed. Anyway, continue, please.
I think I had essentially made my point, which is Wembanyama, the team surrounding him is so bad that if he was on an average NBA team, if you plopped Victor Wembanyama on who's the most average team in the NBA, Chicago. You put Wembanyama on the Bulls instead of Vucevic, or you put Wembanyama on the Pacers even, like instead of Miles Turner. And I think those teams could go, like, I think the Bulls could go from 36. I mean, the Bulls could have 46 wins right now. He's such a freak impact on both ends of the court. And I think, something that doesn't get discussed a lot about Wembanyama's game right now is he's just racking up turnovers. In March, he's averaging 4.5 turnovers per game compared to his 4.8 assists. Right. But I think that's just a product of what the rest of his team looks like. Some passing mistakes, trying to navigate like being a playmaker at 7'5". But he's been incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm out of superlatives at this point. I'm really excited to see where this goes. I'm on record as saying I would absolutely consider, if not lean toward taking him number 1 in fantasy next year. I know a lot of people have speculated on the injury stuff, and it feels like that's been assuaged to a certain degree, right? I mean, obviously you feel a lot better about his health now than we did coming in. I think we projected him for 55 games. We're like, that might be too high. They're going to be really cautious with him. He's probably going to get hurt. I mean, he moves extremely well, and who knows how. There's just not really a sample for a guy this large who moves and plays the way he does in terms of what that's going to look like long term, and it's so specific player to player. But I think you got to feel good about the durability through year 1 for a guy who plays through a lot of contact. It's not like he's just hanging around on the perimeter. They're constantly throwing him like extremely risky passes in transition, and he's landing all over the place, and really has not had a true injury scare all season. And again, the Spurs have not been as careful with him as we expected. He's still playing like 29 to 31 minutes a lot of nights. It's like, what is this going to look like? When he gets to the point where they need him to play 37, 38, 39 minutes more routinely, I think the numbers are just going to become more and more outrageous. So yeah, I hope the Spurs go out of their way to improve this roster this offseason. And I think it's a very delicate balance of, we don't want to go all in on the wrong guys just to feel like we have a better team around him. You got to build this thing the right way. But I'm interested to know, like, how long of a leash do you think he's going to have in terms of when does it flip to, all right, it's year 3. You've won one playoff game. All right, when is this going to start? Because that comes for all these young stars.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it depends on how aggressive the Spurs are with putting a team together around him. If they essentially run back the same team, nobody's going to be like, is Wembanyama actually bad because he can't get the Spurs to
Right.
40 wins? So I think it all depends on who they put around him. Which I mean, it's not going to be necessarily an easy task. It's not like I don't think they're necessarily swimming in cap room next year. I think they have a decent amount. Vassell makes 29, Keldon Johnson's at 19, Zach Collins is at 16. So they're a little bit jammed up, especially between Keldon Johnson and Zach Collins in terms of like their flexibility. But definitely, I think by 2 years from now, 25, 26, I think there's an angle for them to potentially make some sort of big free agent swing or a trade. And I mean, they're going to get good draft picks, at least this year.
Well, that's part of it. I think they'll figure out the flexibility, right? I mean, you almost have, it's like having a star rookie quarterback on a rookie deal in the NFL.
Right.
Where it's like you got to. I wouldn't say you have to take advantage of this window in the way that we talk about it in football, where it's like you got to win a Super Bowl in the first 4 years before that contract kicks in. Like, it doesn't really work like that in the NBA. I don't think that's realistic, but you have flexibility here, and you have the ability to add some contracts while Wembanyama is relatively cheap. I do wonder. It's like Donovan Mitchell, I think, could be had for the right price. We'll see if San Antonio is willing to pay said price, and if they have enough ultimately outside of draft picks that would appeal to the Cavs, because I do think Donovan Mitchell is going to be available this offseason. And I also wonder, how willing are players going to be to play with Wembanyama this early in his career? Like you haven't really heard anybody say a bad thing about him, right? It's like if you're a veteran like Donovan Mitchell, you want to win desperately. You've never really done anything in the postseason. Like is hitching your wagon to 20-year-old Victor Wembanyama, like that suddenly feels pretty appealing.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same way about Doncic. I guess he had like a little bit with Porzingis, where him and Porzingis didn't necessarily mesh. But sometimes you hear like, whoever it might be, like Wes Matthews or some other players, Redick has talked about playing with Doncic and just like how immediately they knew that he was unreal. Like they knew that he was a basketball savant and something like they had never seen. So I think Wembanyama will probably end up having that same sort of. He may have that same sort of effect where a guy would like to be like, okay, I got to play next to this guy.
All right, let's go to the comments here. Paul says, "Come on, guys, you guys are forgetting Kobe. He was the one in between Jordan and LeBron." Yeah, I don't think that's I think that's fair. I would argue I think Shaq was the better player during that brief period. I think it was really only 1 year, right? Didn't LeBron come in like the year after Jordan retired? And obviously LeBron didn't become the LeBron James until 3 or 4 years into his career, but. I think we're just talking about the overall talent pool in the league, not who was the best player necessarily. I mean, obviously Kobe's in that discussion, but I think he was, the best player in the NBA for a while relative to his peers. I don't think that list of potential options was as deep in 2004 as it was now.
Yeah, I may have said Kobe, but I think more so what I meant was I don't think there was a generation. There was no like generation of up and coming players between when Jordan retired the first time. And then, because you're talking about Jordan retired again. And what was it? 02? Oh,
I think
remember.
So. I was like 10.
But Kobe, Kobe didn't get his first top 5 MVP finish until 01-02. And he was behind, Tim Duncan, who of course, obviously very good, but 25 years old, Jason Kidd, 28, second in voting, Shaq, 29, and then Tracy McGrady, obviously also incredible. But his career fizzled out a lot quicker than I think, you would anticipate. McGrady was pretty much done before he was 30. So, yeah.
And he was languishing on bad teams. His best years were for some Magic teams that were not good whatsoever. I don't want to go too far down like history lesson lane here, but I think the big thing, if you look back, starting with probably 98, 99, there were some really bad drafts, right? And that's when you say there was not this base of young talent. It's like the 99 draft gave us a lot of good players. It didn't really give us any oh man, this guy's an all-timer right away, right? It's like the best player in that draft in terms of value added was Manu Ginobili, then Sean Marion, then Kirilenko, then Jason Terry, right? It's like you got these guys who are, all-stars to borderline all-stars, but not guys who are carrying the league. The 2000 draft, maybe the worst draft ever. Michael Redd's the best player in that draft in terms of career value. 2001, not a whole lot better. Gave us Pau Gasol and Tony Parker. Third and fourth best players in that draft were Shane Battier and Joe Johnson. The 2002 draft, really bad. That was like Carlos Boozer, Amari Stoudemire, Yao Ming. When you go through 4 consecutive drafts like that, where you don't really have a single player who is ruling the league, nobody who is, I would argue, a top 10 player at their peak. That's just what's going to happen. Like 2-3 years down the road, as those players become 23, 24, 25-year-olds, when they're in the rising stars portion of their careers, you're just naturally going to have a dip.
Yeah, and I think the opposite sort of happens in I guess you could probably say starting in 2018. You get Doncic and SGA and Trae Young in the same draft. The 2018 draft is ridiculous. I mean, Brunson's in there. Jaren Jackson's also in there. Yep. You have Zion in 2019 with also Morant's coming in. 2020, Anthony Edwards, Halliburton, Maxey, even Bane, LaMelo, and then more recently, Cade, Mobley, Paolo, etc., and Wembanyama now. So like the last, I mean, that's more than 4 years. That's 8 years. Have been pretty ridiculous from a talent standpoint in the drafts.
Yeah, I think from a depth and a peak talent perspective, right? It's like you're getting on average like 1 to 2 top 10, arguable top 10 players per draft. Really going back to like 2013 with the Giannis draft. And I obviously, I'm looking at 2017 right now. It's like that gave us Tatum, Mitchell, Adebayo, Fox, Lauri Markkanen, guys like that. And maybe we'll look back in 10 years from now and we won't speak of those guys in the same light. I don't know how people felt about Jason Terry in 2002 relative to now, but no, you're right. I mean, these drafts have been stocked. Everybody talks about the 2024 draft being down. It definitely is, no question, especially when you have, Cooper Flagg coming up as a guy everybody's monitoring for 2025. But I'm telling you, man, every year it's not like somebody's going to emerge, right? There's going to be 1 or 2 really good players in that draft. I have a hard time believing that we could just have a draft come and go. And it's just like, yeah, nobody was really very good. Like players are just too skilled now, man. I think there's a difference between a bad draft and a draft that doesn't have a clear number 1 pick.
Yeah. And there's so much more. And I mean, I think this is some of the reason too, that the drafts are better now and the young talent's better now compared to in the 90s, especially before Dirk, was nobody was really drafting international players. Correct. Especially not like in the top 10, but now had sometimes half the lottery is basically international players. And I don't know that much about this draft to really dive in.
It's an international heavy draft.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Is it actually bad, or is it just that the college players are bad and everybody's really confused about the international players? Because we're always confused about the international players.
Yeah, you're totally right. And, we're not breaking any news here, but Jokic, Doncic, Giannis, SGA, Embiid, Wembanyama, none of these guys are American-born players, right? And this is the way the league has been trending for a while. All right, Christopher says, how do we feel about increased minutes for Trendon Watford in a weekly lineup block league? So good to see you're still kicking here as we near the end of the fantasy season. Trendon Watford has played 21, 19, 24, and 29 minutes over the last 4 games for this just preposterous Brooklyn Nets team that is really playing out the string. Cam Johnson did play yesterday, played off the bench. He will not play tonight. So that should be good for Trendon Watford. In terms of the schedule, 26 teams play 4 games this week. Only Chicago, Denver, San Antonio, and Utah play 3 times. So those are really the 4 teams you need to keep an eye out for in a weekly lineup league. Everybody else plays 4. And obviously Trendon Watford and the Nets are in that category. If you're in a deeper league, I think this is worth paying attention to, right? I mean, Watford has had his moments in the past, with Portland when the minutes have been there. I think at the end of last season, when they pulled the plug, he looked pretty good. He's averaged 14 points, 6 boards, 2 assists, a steal, and a half a block. Decent 3-point shooter as well. He'll take 2 or 3 a game. Any thoughts on him?
Well, he started getting the minutes when Cam Johnson got hurt. Yeah. And then Cam Johnson played, what'd you say, 20 minutes? And then Watford, still played real time. So I'm not trying to say that it's going to go back immediately. I'm fine adding him like a deeper league and just seeing how it plays out the rest of the year. But I would also not be surprised if Cam Johnson gets back integrated into like 30 minutes a game and then Watford's back down to like 10. But if you need someone like off the waiver wire and it's a stream, give Watford an ad. He, like Nick said, he's proven in the past he can hook up numbers.
I actually do kind of like him this week because so Cam Johnson's sitting out tonight, presumably on the second night of a back-to-back, right? They're being cautious with him. He'll probably play Wednesday against Indy, but they have another back-to-back Saturday, Sunday. So it's not a
Interesting.
guarantee that he sits one half of that one out. But if we're using the very recent past year as a guide, I think there's a pretty good chance Cam Johnson could sit either Saturday against Detroit or perhaps more likely Sunday against Sacramento. So yeah, I mean, the fact that Watford still played 29 minutes off the bench with Cam Johnson also coming off the bench yesterday does have to be viewed as a positive sign. So yeah, again, hopefully you're in a deeper league if we're talking Trendon Watford here, but I think he is pretty viable. Matt says, "What's up, guys? Who do you think has the best week-long value out of Scoot, Suggs, Horford, or McConnell in a head-to-head points league? I'm in a 2-week-long finals and one 2-week-long final." He also followed up to say Scoot was grabbed by his opponent, so he's off the table. So we'll say Suggs, Horford, or McConnell. He also said Aaron Nesmith, Trey Mann, and Andrew Nemhard are also available.
I was going to say Scoot, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Would probably be your best bet there. Yeah, I think between, Trey Mann is kind of interesting, but Micic has taken on almost an alarmingly big role for the Charlotte Hornets. It's between Suggs, Horford. I'm just worried about Horford sitting too much. So to me, it's basically between Suggs and McConnell. To me, that's almost a wash, despite that, the very few minutes that McConnell plays relative to basically anybody else. But McConnell, over the past 9, is averaging 25 fantasy points a game. And pulling up Suggs quickly here, over the past 9, is averaging 27 fantasy points per game. And I think both of those guys will have equal value. Nick, I don't know if you have the schedule up, but like whoever has more games from like here to the end of the season, that might almost be where I'd lean, like more total games. But I don't know if either of these guys are really at risk of being rested necessarily.
No.
So I don't know if that really factors in.
I don't think it does because I think both of these teams, I mean, they're the 5 and the 6 right now. They're separated by a game and a half. Indy specifically is at risk of falling into the play-in zone. They're only a half game up on Miami. So I think both these teams need to grind until game 82. I mean, Orlando could conceivably get all the way up to 3. They're only a game and a half behind Cleveland. So I wouldn't worry about the rest situation. And, if this is a 2-week thing where you're locking in lineups today, 4-game week for Orlando this week, 4-game week for Indy, 4 for Orlando next week, only 3 for the Pacers. So you're getting the games advantage with Suggs. You're getting the slight advantage in terms of what he's averaged of late. And he has a pretty good schedule this week specifically. They play Portland tonight at home. That's one of the worst teams in the NBA. At New Orleans on Wednesday, that's a tough one. But they get Charlotte Friday, Chicago, team that slipped a bunch on defense on Sunday. So I would go Jalen Suggs.
Yeah, I think it's a good call.
Christian Rogers says, "Good afternoon, fellas." Good afternoon, Christian. Is John Collins a drop? I'm in the championship, and I'm worried about him being ruled out or shut down. Yeah, man. The Utah Jazz, way too much exposure to the Jazz for me this season. This is 2 years in a row that they've kind of done this to us. Collins did not play on Sunday. Prior to that, he had played 4 games in a row. Currently questionable for their next game. They play tomorrow against Cleveland. They are on a 3-game week, so I think that has to factor in as well. They don't have any back-to-backs. But they're all relatively tough matchups. Cleveland at the Clippers, which they're not as good as they were early in the year on defense, but still not a plus matchup. And then Golden State on Sunday. Yeah, I think the risk of him missing one of those games, plus the fact that basically everybody else has a 4-game week, you can kind of go game to game if this is a daily lineups league. If it's weekly, I think I actually would be okay dropping him in favor of a 4-gamer.
He's hard to drop because he's averaging 35 fantasy points in March.
That's tough, man. He's played well when he's out there.
I know, and to me, he's not necessarily one of their guys who I really feel like is at risk in the same way that like Markkanen is or Jordan Clarkson being sort of shut down, like half shut down. I think this might just be like a legitimate injury for Collins that he just could work his way back from and then continue playing. But if there's someone, like Nick said, if there's someone comparable, with a similar upside, maybe averages 30 fantasy points per game, even 28, that plays an extra game. Because if you're in a points league, I don't know if you are necessarily, but if you're in a points league, it's just about total fantasy points. So if you got someone 28 fantasy points playing 4 times compared to 35 fantasy points playing 3 times, it's just a math equation, right? That's how I'd approach it.
For what it's worth on Utah on the shutdown stuff, like I don't understand what they're doing here, right? It's like Markkanen, for some reason, they've kind of been softly shutting him down. Like Clarkson's missed a bunch of time. I think it's a real injury because he has played a little bit. They've been just weird with Kessler all season. Even the Sexton minutes early on were strange. I still don't really understand what they're trying to accomplish here. They are basically locked into a bottom 10 record, which matters because their pick is top 10 protected. They currently are tied for the 8th worst record, and they have clinched essentially, barring some sort of disaster here with Atlanta and like Utah winning out. They've basically clinched a bottom 10 record. Not a guarantee that you keep that pick, but tends to be pretty solid. So they don't have a whole lot of motivation, I would say, the rest of the way to shut anybody down, other than just trying to get looks at some of these younger guys.
Yeah, they are. They're really frustrating. Let's put it that way.
They really are, man. They really are. All right. Keep sending questions in the chat, guys. If you're in your fantasy playoffs, we're happy to answer those. I wanted to ask you, Alex, about a couple guys for next season, and I did just have the Jazz on my list. Yeah, like, is this going to continue to be a concern? Like, you always worry about, teams tend to do this for 1 or 2 years at a time. It's usually not any longer than that. Like, is next season, is that finally the time where Utah hits the gas here? It's like, do you go into next year with any trepidation, drafting Lauri Markkanen, drafting Walker Kessler?
I think I do to an extent. I don't, I tried to tell myself that I would start only drafting players from teams that I thought could legitimately make the playoffs or would probably win at least 45 games, like just good teams.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that went wrong in my leagues went wrong because I drafted guys who were playing for bad teams and got shut down. I drafted DeAndre Ayton, who just was weirdly bad because he was sleeping on an air mattress. That's a different issue. But Anthony Simons as well. I grabbed Sexton and Gafford, Rozier, guys like that. So yeah, I'm definitely concerned. I mean, I think it's hard because you and I pulling back the curtain a little bit. Like you and I, especially you release an initial set of projections, then we tweak it, and that's what generates our rankings, right? But there's no way for us in those like projections or our rankings or whatever, unless they're just literally hand adjusted, to be like, oh, I'm bringing Lauri Markkanen down a round in my rankings because the team is bad, But I think fantasy players should approach teams that they believe will be potentially in the lottery with extreme caution and just downgrade all of those guys in your fantasy value.
I think you're right. And it's tough to predict what those teams are going to be, right? It's like we didn't go into the year and say, I think Desmond Bane's going to get hurt. I think John Morant's going to get hurt. I think Marcus Smart's going to get hurt, and the Grizzlies are going to be terrible, and it's going to affect Jaren Jackson. It's like that's one that there's just no real way to predict. But I think you're right, and I'm doing the same thing. I'm going to try to stay away as much as I can from, I think, like Jeremy Grant is a good example, right? It's like somebody like I like the player, I liked where he was going in drafts. I took him on way too many teams, and you kind of get caught up in the heat of the draft. It's like, oh, 72nd overall pick, Jeremy Grant's still on the board. Great. It's like, well, yeah, that feels awesome for the first 2 months of the season, and all of a sudden, they're 6-41, and he's barely playing any games over the second half, and you're just worse yet is the guys like Grant or Collins or Markkanen, where you get to a point in the year when it's crunch time in your fantasy league, and you don't even know if you could put him in the starting lineup because so many leagues are still weekly lock, right? It's like, yeah, he has a 4-game week, but is it actually a 4-game week? It's like, it's almost better if a guy's just completely shut down, because then all right, I need to go replace them. Like, it's more frustrating for these teams that won't commit. The Mark Williams, the LaMelo Ball conundrum, which at least finally the Hornets have indicated that neither of those guys are likely coming back. Where are you going to be comfortable taking Walker Kessler? And I know a lot can change, obviously, between now and like next September. He was being drafted on average around pick like 70, 75, going a lot higher in some formats, but that's between, Yahoo, ESPN, CBS, Underdog, Fantrax. He's just outside the top 100 in terms of per game value in 9Cat.
So I will say before I jump on Kessler, I had, one of the things I had done early in the season was I tried to put together a list of like, sort of like a fantasy value targets and stayaways. And I included like a bad team filter. And I just used the bottom 6 in I think it was title odds from FanDuel or something, just as like a blind, hey, I think these teams are going to be bad. It was Wizards, Pistons, Spurs, Hornets, Rockets, which ended up being pretty predictive.
Yeah.
Although, the Rockets thing, you would have avoided Şengün. You would have avoided, Van Vliet and Jalen Green and guys like that. But in terms of Walker Kessler, I don't know. It's like, does Will Hardy like him? Like, I don't know what's going on anymore, and as a rookie, he came onto the season late, ranked 93rd overall this year, 102 and 8 cat. I think it'd be fine, probably just because he's so dominant in one category, to still draft him like 75th, something like that. I think there will be people who draft him higher just because they're like, no, this will be the year. John Collins didn't really show us that much. He just came on late at the end of the year, but that's kind of fake.
Mm-hmm.
Kessler's their real development piece. So, like, sort of blind, I would say I think drafting Kessler next year around pick 70, 75 is probably fine, especially if you're in a 2-center league.
How about Jalen Green? Are we going to be tricked by how Jalen Green ends the season? Last month, he's a top 20 fantasy player. And that's what happens when you average 28, 6, 4, over 1.5 steals, 4 threes per game. Obviously, he shot the lights out for a long time. Even factoring in that stretch, he's been a top 20 player for over a month now. He still ranks 106 on the year in terms of per game value. He's one spot ahead of Jordan Poole on the year. So how do we reckon with that? A guy who plays at a second round level for what could be 2 months, but plays at like an 8th round level for the rest of the season.
I don't know. I mean, I think everybody's been tricked by these guys before. I always use like Taurean Prince as an old example of this. Like, one year with the Hawks, Taurean Prince came on crazy at the end of the year in March and April, and he got a lot of hype, and turns out he's just Taurean Prince. But that's very different because Jalen Green obviously was the number 2 pick in 2021, has pedigree, insane athleticism, and when you watch him, there's a lot of moments where you're like, oh my God, if this guy kind of figures it out. How much do I buy into it? I mean, in March, which is longer than like his quote unquote great sample goes, he is shooting 50% from the field and 41% from 3. And guys like Jalen Green just don't profile as 50% shooters from the field. And he had never shot over 34% before this in terms of from 3. So it's tough to say. I mean, at some point, usually these guys do make an efficiency leap. And I do believe that like the sort of actualized version of what the Rockets want to be their team is that Jalen Green's their leading scorer. So I think, factoring that in, yeah, I mean, you could probably start. I think people will probably start taking the risk on Jalen Green in like the 60s next year, to be honest, especially in points leagues.
Yeah, and I'm more comfortable, of course, doing that in a points league. How about Zach LaVine? I'm just going to keep peppering you in names here.
That's fine.
Is Zach LaVine in like do not draft territory? Is there going to be a buying opportunity on him? Like I was kind of in, honestly. I mean, he was going in. I know in ESPN leagues, he was going like in the late 60s in a lot of drafts. He was coming off of a 77 game season last year, where so many guys missed time, and in a roundabout way, he kind of felt like more of a sure thing. Obviously, that completely blew up in our face. He's had injuries before. He's been all over the place in terms of games played. He'll be going into his age 29 season. The caveat that we have to mention is that roster construction can change between now and next season. But if it stays relatively constant, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I feel like I'm going to end up with him in more leagues than I want to, because I think people are going to be just totally out on him.
Yeah, and the Bulls are in that zone where it's like the team isn't bad; they're just so average, But LaVine has been an injury risk. He's only played more than 70 games 3 times in his career.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, he had kind of a weird year. Still finished 71st in per game rankings, which is, I think, about where people will draft him next year. But I do think he could deliver higher value. Like, if he's a top 50 player again, I wouldn't be shocked next year. But I assume he'll go kind of like what he was doing this year, in that like 60 to 70 range.
It's a really complicated situation in Chicago because obviously DeMar DeRozan is an unrestricted free agent. I think he's probably gone. I mean, knowing the Bulls, I don't know, maybe they'll sign him to a supermax, but I would imagine he's out of the picture. He's still got a couple more years of Vooch. Maybe they try to move him. Allegedly, Lonzo Ball's coming back. Like, I don't know. That really changes things. And perhaps the biggest one is that the LaVine injury has opened the door for Coby White. Like, we think of Coby White completely differently now than we did 4 months ago when he was going with the 140th pick in your fantasy draft.
Yes. Yeah, maybe more frustrating having Zach LaVine come back just because it complicates Coby White's role.
Yeah.
And I look at, and I think the Bulls are going to keep trying to trade Zach LaVine. They weren't able to do it this year, although I guess opinions vary on how much they were actually trying.
Yeah.
But I think they'll continue trying. And then if he goes somewhere, he'll be in a worse situation. I mean, he'll be shooting less. He'll be less involved in the offense, presumably. So I think that should sort of take down his fantasy value as well.
Taurean Prince, by the way, 45th overall fantasy player, his second NBA season. That was 2017-18 as a member of the Hawks. So you're not wrong. Taurean Prince, if somebody had asked me, has he ever finished inside the top 75? I would say no. I certainly would have said no on the top 50, but 45th overall that year. All right, a couple more, then we'll answer some questions to get out of here. Jalen Williams, Jalen Duren. I'm pairing two Jalens together. I think both of these guys are going to be big time risers. You know, the Pistons are going to give us the rigmarole again next offseason. They're gonna do something that's going to make us feel a little bit more optimistic. Hey, Cade Cunningham, healthy offseason. You can see people getting talked into this yet again. I really like Jalen Duren. I mean, he's kind of been insulated from the disaster that's been the Pistons. His numbers have been fine. And then Jalen Williams at OKC, even with the Thunder being completely healthy, it's like it's somewhat rare for a guy to take that big of a step when there's not a Zach LaVine, Coby White situation where it's like, okay, this is why this guy has gotten so much better, because this opportunity opened up. OKC's been the healthiest team in the league, and it still feels like he took a big leap.
Jalen Williams, he is so good, man. He's the perfect sort of Thunder player where he understands his role. He's just he doesn't force anything. I mean, I think as evidenced by the fact that he's 54% from the field and 43% from three for 20 points a game. Like very quietly, one of the most efficient guards / forwards, whatever position he even plays, wings in the NBA. I would, if you're asking me like who would I rather draft, to be Jalen Williams. I still think the Pistons are going to be horrible next year. I think it'd be really bad still. And that sort of worries me about Duren. And Duren may be one of the best fantasy centers in the league. And if you're in a 2-center league, I'll hear you out on Duren over Jalen Williams. But I would much prefer just Jalen Williams, because I think I don't know if he's like it's hard to say he's like a superstar sleeper, but he's someone where it's like, I don't know, 4 years from now, 3 years from now, if he's averaging, 26 a game, 5 assists, I mean, maybe next to SGA, that might be hard, but he's really good.
It's such a unique situation because I think he's arguably the third most exciting player on his own team, right? Behind SGA and Chet. It's like, I don't think unless you're super locked in on the NBA or locked in on fantasy, I don't think the average person realizes how good Jalen Williams is. And it's like, it might be like a couple of years until he even makes an all-star team just because of how crazy deep the West is. Like, he was amazing to begin the year. And there was no Jalen Williams all-star talk because everybody just kind of understood, he's not going to make it. There's just not enough spots in the Western Conference. So yeah, it's rare for a player to kind of develop in this spot, right? Most of the superstars are the guy. Even if it's on a bad team early on, you kind of get your reps, you develop into a superstar in that situation, as opposed to the second or third option on a really good team. He is the 42nd ranked fantasy player in 8-cat this season, was being drafted around pick 75 on average. On one hand, it's hard to see him going up another level because I think if anything, OKC is going to add talent, right? So it's not like anybody's, maybe you send out like a Josh Giddey to bring somebody else in, but it's not like the team context is really going to improve for him. So that's kind of where I get stuck with Jalen Williams. Like, would you be willing to take him in like the early third round of a fantasy draft, or as good as he is there kind of a blockade to him ever, being as good of a fantasy player as he could be? Like right now, I would say as good as he is in fantasy, he's probably even more valuable in real life.
Yeah, your point about Giddey is interesting. I looked up, I just pulled up Jalen Williams' numbers with Josh Giddey off the court. 8% usage increase up to 29%, 27 points a game, 5 assists, a steal and a half, and a block. My God. So yeah, I think blindly, would I take him basically where he ranks right now, somewhere in like the 40 range? Yeah, because I don't think there's really I don't think he's going to get any worse. I mean, Chet Holmgren is probably going to end up taking some more shots next year as well. Someone else whose ADP will be intriguing, but yeah, late third round, early third round for Jalen Williams does not really feel that crazy.
All right, we'll hit a couple more questions and we'll hop out of here. Matt says Barnes or Ellis in a points league. Presumably Harrison Barnes, the healthier of the Barneses. So Malik Monk, done for the rest of the regular season, maybe done for the season, depending on if Sacramento can advance. And Kevin Huerter, they've already told us he's not coming back no matter what. Like, we could make the NBA Finals. That man will not play again this season. Of course, Harrison Barnes immediately has 2 good games after doing like nothing for the last 2 months. Yeah. He's got 44 points over his last 2. But Keon Ellis, also playing a ton of minutes, already saw a bump. He had basically stolen Davion Mitchell's role, and then Huerter gets hurt, and now Malik Monk gets hurt. I think, both of these guys obviously become appealing for a Kings team that doesn't have a ton of depth. They're going to have to backfill with forwards, right? It's like, all of a sudden, like Trey Lyles and Vezenkov, who they just got back. It's like they don't have a ton of guard depth. So yeah, Davion Mitchell probably benefits. I don't think they really like him that much. This is so tough. I think I would maybe go Keon Ellis. Like I've had my weeks with Harrison Barnes this season. I never timed the market right on Harrison Barnes.
Yeah, the thing is, in these 2 games, Barnes hit half his threes and, shot 55% from the field, right? And he took some more shots. Yeah, he took 19 shots against Dallas. But then he took 12 shots and went 9 for 12. So it's like, I think he just kind of had 2 good games. The thing also about Keon Ellis too is like, I don't really think Keon Ellis is a guy who's like scaling up his usage that much either, which I think puts Sacramento in a kind of a weird spot. I mean, he did take 12 shots against Dallas, but then took 4 right against Utah. So
Harrison Barnes is probably safer. I hate to say it.
Harrison Barnes is safer, but if you need defense, Keon Ellis is your guy, because since March 12th, basically since he drew his first start sort of in this stretch, 1.8 steals, 0.9 blocks, which is about as good a defense as you're going to grab off the waiver wire. But it's in a points league, so yeah, Barnes is better for points leagues.
Yeah, go Harrison Barnes. Chris says, just need 1 more week from Jaren Jackson Jr. Odds he plays 3 of the 4 weekly lock points. So I assume we're just asking, does he play all 4 games? They play at Detroit tonight, at Milwaukee Wednesday, back-to-back Friday, Saturday, Detroit, Philly. No possible way to tell. He could play all 4. He could miss all 4. He could sit one half of the back-to-back. I will say, it's been better lately, right? It's like I think Desmond Bane coming back has kind of been like, all right, well, we'll at least try to put something reasonable on the court here. He's played 7 in a row. Desmond Bane is currently banged up. He's not going to play tonight, so I don't know if that there's really a 1-to-1 correlation there, but chances that he plays 3 of 4 games, 70%, 75%.
Sure. I mean, Jaren Jackson has not sat out a game since Desmond Bane returned. There
we go.
Which is that a coincidence? Probably
Solidarity.
Not. Yeah, I think he has a decent chance to play 3 of the 4 games this week.
Yeah. All right, another Grizzlies question. Admiral Nita says, thoughts on streaming Luke Kennard with the various roster possibilities of having or not having any of Bane, Aldama, Triple J, Pippen, Jordan Goodwin. They have that back-to-back coming up as well. The Grizzlies, again, night to night are just wild, right? Like Conchar and Aldama are questionable right now for tonight. Williams, Bane, Watanabe, conceivably those guys could come back later in the week. There's just no real way to predict that. So I guess we'll try to talk about Kennard as independently as we can. He just missed 5 games, came back, played against Orlando on Saturday, did play 30 minutes, which is nice. Nobody shot it well for Memphis. They got crushed. They only scored 88 points. He took 10 shots, took 7 threes. I don't hate it. I mean, you're in a 12-team cat league, so you're looking for threes here out of Kennard. If he plays, he's probably going to take somewhere between like 6 and 9 threes in every game.
Yeah, and he's passed pretty well too. He's been passing the ball. It's not a big sample, but 8 games in March, 12 points, 2.9 threes, 5 assists. Very good. So yeah, assuming the personal matter is over and he's just healthy in general, which at this point, there's no reason to assume he's not healthy. I definitely like him as a stream.
He also asked, Markelle Fultz, would he be a possibility? I'm just not really all that intrigued. To be honest, I think we're at the point where I'd rather have Luke Kennard than Markelle Fultz. Magic do play 4 games. They don't have any back-to-backs, so in theory, Fultz should play in all those. He just hasn't been very good, and even the minutes haven't really been there. He played 7 or 8 games in a row and played in the teens in most of those.
I don't really think he's healthy, and also the Magic have gone so far this season without him that I think they have no reason to try to just like jam him back into the rotation for 30 minutes. So yeah, I think I would rather have Kennard as well.
Any confidence in Jaden Ivey tonight or rest of season when Cade Cunningham sits? Look, I think he's still viable when Cade is out there. Ivy missed a game late last week, came back, struggled on Friday against Washington, what should have been a good matchup. Pistons actually ended up winning that game. Still gave you 13, 7, and 5. It's like, especially if you're in a points league, those are kind of the bad nights now for Ivy. Like the counting stats have been there for the most part. He's scoring in double figures every single night. So as always, depends what your expectations are. But I think if you're in a 12, 14 team points league, I'm fine with them rest of season. I don't see them shutting them down. They've already accomplished what they needed to in terms of losing games.
He's pretty up and down. But yeah, I mean, in a points league, I think there are probably better options on 4-game weeks, but he's 27 fantasy points a game in March, which is like fine.
Yeah.
And then in category leagues, if you're really field goal percentage sensitive, I probably wouldn't. I think there are better guys for you, but he's okay. Yeah, it's more of a 14 team thing, I think.
Yeah. Pretty good schedule this week too. Memphis, Atlanta, Memphis, Brooklyn. Doesn't get a whole lot better than that as far as 4-game weeks go, and they do have that back-to-back Friday and Saturday. All right, we got a nice little message here from Paul. He says, "I finished my season first in the regular season. Just got eliminated yesterday in the semis, thanks to Embiid and Şengün going down. We feel your pain. There's nothing you can do about that. Thank you guys for all the knowledge throughout the season. Thank you, Paul. Thank you everybody who's listened to us and checks in every week on the pod. We love doing these. We're going to keep doing them through the playoffs. We'll still be running 5 episodes a week through the end of the regular season as well. So good note to end on. Appreciate all the great questions as always. Best of luck to everybody still hanging around in the fantasy playoffs. Hopefully you can finish them up this week, take home that first place. And like I said, we'll still be running them. So Dr. A tomorrow, me and Brandon Kravitz on Wednesday. We'll have Dr. A and Rick Campbell on Thursday. And what remains of the waiver wire, I guess, on Fridays. You guys are doing the Lord's work, man, trying to find waiver ads this time of year.
Well, this upcoming episode will be the last Friday pod of the year. We're going to recap sleepers and bust picks that we had at the beginning of the year and see how right or wrong we were. So it'll be a bit of a recap episode more than like a true waiver wire episode.
Can we get a sneak peek? Do you have your sleepers and busts at hand? If not, that's fine.
I don't have them on hand.
Okay.
No.
All right. Well, you'll have to listen on Friday then. That turned
exactly.
into a good tease. Yeah. Check it out on Friday. Ken, Shannon, and Alex, the finale of the ever popular Friday waiver wire episode. That'll do it for us today. Go check us out on YouTube. If you're watching live on Twitter, check it out on the RotoWire YouTube page. Like, subscribe, comment. We'll answer your questions in the comments there as well. Dr. A on the mic tomorrow.